Welcome back, everyone. Continuing with our diagram, the next thing we're going to talk about is cloud storage. Now, cloud storage is actually pretty simple. Essentially what it is it's a backup source of data, and it lives in the cloud so that it doesn't live on a local machine that you own, or an on-site as they're called. Essentially, everything we've learned about so far is when you build your own system. You can do this also on the cloud using AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Provider. Much of this diagram is pretty much going to be the exact same because it doesn't really matter where your system is hosted. It's either self-hosted or hosted on a cloud architecture platform. The main thing here is just that you want to have an additional backup, which is cloud storage. So other than the physical devices or the physical databases that you have, you might want to use an additional storage location. Another way you can imagine this is if there was actually a line also between the web servers and the cloud storage so that you can store not just the data coming out of your data hose, but also any data going into your database or from your services or from your job queues. Essentially anywhere that you can store data on your system, you can back it up on cloud storage. That's really all cloud storage represents. So talking about cloud storage, again, we can replace database, data warehouse. There's numerous types of databases, which we'll talk about later. And then data warehouse, as we mentioned, is just a place that we store all of our user data. But inside, you can store app files. You can store media files. So app files being the ones that we actually pass to the browser so they can build the website. Whatever the final JS, HTML, CSS that we want to pass along are, we can store that on cloud storage as well. You might be familiar with Amazon AWS's S3 bucket. You can easily store those files on there. You can also store media files being images, audio and visual, videos. All of those different files can also live on cloud storage in a blob database. We'll talk about that later as well. It's just a type of database that can store these more complicated forms of files. We also have the raw data, as I mentioned, that goes into the data warehouse, or formatted data goes into also the data warehouse or the database. At the end of the day, the main idea here is that you can back up any kind of file or data into your cloud storage. And that is all cloud storage is. So now that we understand cloud storage, this kind of links to our last topic, which is the CDN. Now, the CDN stands for Content Delivery Network. And the purpose of a content delivery network is so that it makes it much more performant for us to deliver our content of our website to many different users all around the world. And the reason why, as you saw in the image, it was linked to all these other parts of the actual diagram is because you can store the files that you receive for the website into the CDN, either from cloud storage or from the load balancer. The main idea is just that the CDN is going to hold the files that you want to serve to the browser and not have the browser go directly to the web server. Instead, you just have it receive it from the CDN. Let's take a quick look at an example here. Let's say that we're looking at this world map here. And let's say that our origin server, which is where we host and we own the server that contains the most up-to-date files for our website. Let's say this lives somewhere in Europe. Let's say England, for example, the UK. Now, let's say we have a user that wants to access our website, and they're somewhere in North America. Let's say they're somewhere in Canada. What's going to happen is that without a CDN, they're going to have to make the request directly to our origin server. Now, as we saw with our example before when we learned about web servers and serving this information directly to our browser, we make a request to the DNS. DNS then gives us the location of where the server is, and then the browser will make that request halfway around the world to get to the origin server inside of the UK. Now, this takes a lot of time because the latency of the travel time for a request to go through halfway around the world is very long. So what we can do is we use what's known as an edge server. Now, an edge server is a bunch of servers that live in different parts of the world. They are localized servers that hold the same type of information that the browser is asking for from the origin server. So now when this same user wants to make a request, what will happen is that the DNS will work with the CDN to figure out the nearest edge based on the user's location. Then it will then give the appropriate IP address so that instead of going to the origin server, it's going to find the nearest one that is also in North America, and then it's just going to make the request there. So this, again, is going to work for users all around the world, wherever they are. Now, without access to the CDN, if they were to make requests for the website, they would all have to pull against our origin server, which is really far. Depending on where you are in the world, you might be making an entire travel the distance of the world itself. Instead, because we have access to edge servers, they will instead just receive the IP address of their nearest local edge server. And this greatly increases the performance of our website because it drastically reduces the latency of all of these different users we have around the world. Now, you really leverage a CDN when you are much more global. You could argue that the majority of apps are accessible in theory to all users around the world because anyone anywhere can access your website. So should you always use a CDN? Because you do pay for the CDN. I do want to make that clear. And we'll learn about some of the complexities of running a CDN, mainly because in order to make sure these edge servers have the most up-to-date code, you have to figure out when to make these changes from your origin server and then deploying them to the edge servers. This is where some of the complexity of using a CDN is, and also the cost of using one. But generally speaking, whenever most companies roll out applications, they roll them out regionally, meaning that the actual marketing campaigns that they target are all centered around some specific region to begin with, most likely where the actual company is located to begin with. So CDNs typically come into play when you have large distributed systems where you have a lot of global usage. But this is all CDN is. And with this now, we have evaluated pretty much all of our web architecture components. So now that you understand all of these pieces, what we can do now is take a deeper dive into the core principles of system design. Because we understand what these components represent and how they work, it's much easier for us now to talk and discuss as well as understand how we want to actually approach designing a system in the first place. Because now we know the components, we can now understand why and how we want to use them in order to build systems effectively and efficiently. So join me in the next series of videos where we will do deeper dives into all these sections as well as understand how we want to ground our approach to system design. I'll see you in the next video.